Good morning, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, supporters, activists, members of the public in Trinidad and Tobago and across the region and indeed the globe. Indeed, we can make it if we try. This morning, we welcome you to a very special edition of our weekly press conference, midweek press conference. Today, I'm joined by, on my right, the very dynamic attorney at law, Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, Mr. Dinesh Rambally, who himself has been championing the cause of justice in the courts and in the Parliament with several very important judgments and cases, and has been addressing the issues involving the justice system and crime, and will address us in a few minutes. On my left, we have our veteran Member of Parliament, Senator, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, in the person of Mr. Wade Stephen Mark, who will address us later in the proceedings on matters of procurement, economy, and governance. This morning, before we begin, I would like, on behalf of the United National Congress, on behalf of Opposition Leader and former Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, to extend our deepest condolences to the family, friends of the late Black Stallion, Leroy Callis, Dr. Leroy Callis, on his passing. The sad passing of this Calypso icon has robbed the Caribbean of a champion and a consistent spokesman for the oppressed across the country and across the region. He was indeed a proud Southerner and someone who inspired a generation of younger performers in his art form. He entertained us with enriching calypsos that always advocated the cause of the working class and the downtrodden. He promoted ethnic unity and solidarity. From the start of his career, Starling was socially conscious, singing about the ills in society and holding the authorities to account and prescribing solutions indeed. He was unwavering in his appeal for a better quality of life for the exploited and persecuted. He demanded better administration and greater social and economic equity. He reminded society that sufferers had no time, there was no time with people who suffer for tribal differences, and we were all one people, one family. Black Starling was a unique Caribbean voice, a visionary, and he had the courage of his conviction in his fearless approach to his art form and industry. We mourn his death. Mrs. Persad-Bissessar, indeed a fan of his, visited him when she was Prime Minister in the company of former Chairman Dr. Lakram Buru at the San Fernando Teaching Hospital. And Mrs. Persad-Bissessar has, of course, very fond memories of Black Starling. Her favorite song, I believe, is the lead song this morning, We Can Do It If We Try. My favorite song is Bonda. But that would be another discourse. So again, on behalf of the United National Congress, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, the executive of our party and members of Parliament, we extend our very, very deepest condolences on the passing of this icon, and to Patricia and his family, relatives and fans across the world. We join them in solidarity and give comfort to the family this morning. So we put that on the table as we begin, and we look forward to further tributes from the national community. So without further ado, I want to introduce, of course, our representative from Chaguanas West, a gentleman who has been making waves in the courts and outside in the Parliament as well, I must say, in his fearless approach and his struggle for justice, for equality, fair play, and good governance. And he will address us now on several matters related to his shadow portfolio in the Office of the Attorney General and National Security. Mr. Dinesh Rambally, please.
Thank you, Dr. Moonilal, for that, Very, I have to say, warm and generous introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, I am very privileged to be joining my colleagues here, Dr. Roodal Moonilal, Member of Parliament, Senator Wade Mack, our leader in the Senate. It is my privilege to welcome everyone this morning. At the outset, I must reiterate that what has been said in our recently held press conferences, although we are all seeking to wind down during this time of the year, one way or the other, owing to the seriousness of the governance issues facing our country, Mrs. Persad-Bissessar has mandated members of the loyal opposition, your government in waiting, to engage in holding the Rowley-led PNM government to account by way of continuing these press conferences. Ladies and gentlemen, 2022 has been a historic year for all the wrong reasons. Over 600 of our fellow citizens have now been murdered. Over 600 families and friends of these victims live with the trauma of these murders. But even worse, the entire nation is witnessing members of the Rowley-led PNM government effectively abandoning their posts. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, as we look to the members of the government charged with the responsibility of ensuring the safety and security of our citizenry, those who are paid by taxpayers to do this job, we see that they have effectively abandoned their posts. The primary function of any government is to ensure the safety and security of the liberty and property of its citizens. This is reflected in our Republican Constitution. By that basic standard, the Rowley-led PNM government is a catastrophic failure. Today, as the shocking murder toll proves, never before has the safety, security, and liberty of our citizenry been under greater threat. Today, the citizens of our nation are living in fear as criminals run rampant and operate with impunity. Brazen home invasions, daylight robberies, and land killings are now all a regular part of life in Trinidad and Tobago. It is cliched for me, for us, to say to you that crime is a complex social issue that requires a holistic approach with policies geared towards improving law enforcement, the justice system, greater access to educational opportunities, increasing employment opportunities, and enhancing social cohesion. After 7 years, and with murders now crossing 600 and breaking records daily, the only policy position this government is actively pursuing at this time is asking citizens to pray. Dr. Rowley, I first want to assure you as Prime Minister that ever since you became Prime Minister, citizens of this country have never stopped praying. They have been praying non-stop. And secondly, instead of asking for divine intervention, try some state intervention. Try doing your job as the head of the National Security Council. It is said God helps those who help themselves. Instead of solely seeking refuge in prayers and sympathetic spokespersons, we need to start acting on substantive data. We need to actively pursue calculated policies that target criminals and help to keep law-abiding citizens safe. 2023 is poised to be an even more violent and horrific year. Mark my words, without a substantive plan to deal with this new unprecedented level of violent crime, 2023 will be an even more horrific and violent year. Now, we do not make this statement lightly. However, we are condemned to a most misfortunate fate if we do not learn from our past mistakes. Ladies and gentlemen, recent history has revealed how the government, how this Rowley-led PNM government is unable to deal with crime. In early January this year, 2022, we had started off this year under siege. Acting Police Commissioner McDonald Jacobs said strategies were being formulated and adjustments being made to the police's crime fighting plans for 2022. And I referenced the Newsday article 7th January 2022. Jacob, strategies underway to tackle crime for the new year. That was January 2022. Minister of National Security, well, I don't know if to say insecurity now. Minister Hines said plans were underway to tackle violent crime at different levels, including through the removal of illegal guns. Pray tell, Minister, what has happened with these plans? Absolutely nothing, and the country is worse off for it. Later in January 2022, Acting Commissioner of Police Jacobs said the focus on getting illegal guns off the streets will include targeting legal ports. Well, that was in January 2022, and you will recall that later this year, when murders are at a record high, Jacobs confesses, so to speak, to the country that the ports are operating without functioning scanners. So Jacobs also said in January the Financial Investigative Bureau will play a greater role in combating white-collar crimes, such as money laundering, unexplained wealth linked to illegal quarrying, and trade in guns and drugs. I again reference an article, Newsday Acting Commissioner of Police Focus on Guns in 2022 by Mr. Darren Bajo. Pray tell, Vacationing Commissioner of Police Jacobs, what has happened to all of these efforts? In early January 2022, then Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police Earl Christopher announced a new measure to peg back murders and violent crime in Northern Division, which has the highest crime rate by dividing the division into two, with more resources being deployed to protect 510,000 households. Pray tell, Acting Deputy Commissioner Earl Christopher, soon to go on vacation, what has happened with these quantum leap crime fighting measures? Ladies and gentlemen, as at the end of January 2022, the murder toll stood above 50, a figure that was doubled compared to last year. So you will recall that then Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi and Minister Hines were attempting to tag team, and I know my colleagues will know this reference, they were attempting to tag team like Victor Jovica and Carlos Colon, attempting to body slam the failures of their government and the opposition's lack of support of the anti-gang laws. History, in this short period of time, history now bears out the fact that the opposition said that the anti-gang law was not effective and that this Rowley-led government passed the anti-gang legislation anyway, promising that it would curb serious crimes. What has happened, ladies and gentlemen? In an article of 1st February 2022 by Rhonda Dowler-Druster, titled 50 Murders in January, Dave Saran disappointed with anti-gang laws. That is an article I'm referencing now. Leading criminologist and the former head of the Police Service Commission, Professor Ramesh Devasaran, when interviewed, said that the Attorney General, Ministry of National Security, and the Police Service, and I quote, this is what Professor Devasaran said, should explain the miserable failure of all these draconian anti-gang legislation repeatedly made in the Parliament, close quote. Professor Devasaran is further quoted as saying, they have not been working. It seems to be a lot of waste talk, promises of having drones and having the borders sealed and imprisoning people with arms and ammunition, and that scared the public at the point where they felt that it was a good law. This is Professor Devasaran's comment. Whatever the opposition did or did not do at the time, the fact is, the legislation that the government was bringing to the Parliament, they have all miserably failed in terms of dealing with the gangs and the violence now troubling the communities and the public and also bothering the government. The professor advised the government to stop blathering statistics. They, and I quote now, they, government, have to step back and do some serious analysis, which has been lacking for a long time now. That is Professor Devasaran. Ladies and gentlemen, I have only scratched the surface of what was some of the advice being offered to the clueless incompetent Rowley-led PNM government at the beginning of this year, 2022, when murders had already started to spiral out of control. During the year, despite the continuation of brazen, violent, bizarre, and heinous crimes being perpetrated every day, in plain sight, broad daylight, and within earshot, Minister Hines responded with the most ridiculous and callous sentiments. He victim shamed the teachers and students of the Rosehill RC Primary School and the children who he claimed were at the wrong place and time when they were shot dead. Hines' recent flip-flop on whether he has public support further demonstrates that he is bipolar when it comes to fighting crime. Minister Hines continues to be wrong as a matter of fact, as a matter of law, and he continues to be wrong when he holds the view that it is not his job to make the citizens feel safe and secure. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public, members of the media, what our fate will be in the new year 2023? Prime Minister Rowley is being stubborn and selfish in refusing to fire Minister Hines. Despite our nation's growing unhealthy diet of daily onslaught, the sad reality is that Prime Minister Dr. Rowley is refusing to fire his incompetent Minister Hines, a man who admits that 70% of the population does not support him in that role. Under Dr. Rowley, in fact, thanks to Dr. Rowley's direct intervention, we have a leaderless, headless, and directionless Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with no substantive Commissioner of Police for the first time in our nation's history. Under Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, various arms of the state, including the Defense Force, the TTPS, the Coast Guard, they have all been rendered impotent, as it were, paralyzed and underused due to the lack of proper policies and guidelines which ought to work in sync to fight crime. Ladies and gentlemen, today, under Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, there are no functioning scanners at the port, meaning guns, drugs, and other illegal items are easily flowing through the country. The people of Trinidad and Tobago should not have to pray in order to remove Minister Hines. The people of Trinidad and Tobago should not have to pray to have functioning scanners on the ports. People of this country should not have to pray for Prime Minister Dr. Rowley to do his job. Ladies and gentlemen, time is short this morning, and I want to quickly remind you of one of the major reasons why criminals are running free on their numerous killing sprees. It is because they see a government which has no respect itself for the rule of law. It is because the criminals see members of the government who are themselves behaving in a manner which is contrary to the Constitution and the law. You'll remember that it was none other than Prime Minister Dr. Rowley who wrongly interfered with what should have been an independent entity, the Police Service Commission, and who have subverted what ought to have been an independent process for delivering a merit list containing candidates for the Commissioner of Police. As a consequence of Dr. Rowley's direct actions, the Police Service Commission collapsed and the country, our country, is today left without a substantive Commissioner of Police. You'll recall that AG Armour misrepresented the full extent, that's his language, you know. He misrepresented the full extent of his involvement in legal proceedings before Miami Circuit Court, thereby jeopardizing the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in court proceedings, all at the expense of taxpaying dollars. His continuing refusal to resign his position as Attorney General and Prime Minister Dr. Rowley's refusal to fire him continues to erode the rule of law and the country's confidence in the administration of justice. The country witnessed, again, the greatest scandal of all time when it saw Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi wrongly, unlawfully, pathetically entering an indemnity agreement with one Vincent Nelson in order to politically persecute political opponents. This country saw the most egregious attempts to induce, bribe, and interfere with a state witness, thereby sabotaging the role and function of the independent director of public prosecutions and potentially subverting the course of justice. To date, we are unaware of the status of police investigations into government officials' involvement in this particular matter. So the criminals are witnessing those who are in charge running afoul of the Constitution and the laws which govern us. The criminals are therefore emboldened. They are saying, if the Prime Minister, if the Attorney General can do this and get away with it, who is me? Time will not permit to develop these matters further at this time. But you can rest assured, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that your UNC government in waiting will be holding the Rowley-led PNM government to account. I want to thank members of the public, members of the media, as I hand back over to Dr. Moonilal.
Thank you very much, Dinesh, for that comprehensive overview of the last year and the crisis we face, really, the calamity as it relates to crime, fighting crime, and the state of the TTPS. I share your view that this Minister Hines has a very, very rare skill, a very rare ability to inspire a lack of confidence.
Yes.
I think that is a thematic that we will have to focus on as we go forward. But at this point, I would like to call upon Senator Mark to address the press conference, members of the press and the national community, on several key issues of governance and procurement and so on. Senator Mark.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Moonilal, and my colleague here with us this morning, MP Dinesh Rambally. Members of the media, 2022 has been tragically a historic year of brazen and frontal assaults and attacks on the working man, the working class, and the vulnerable and marginalized in our society. When the government cannot control, they seek to destroy. When they cannot control, they close, they shut down and destroy. Petrotrin is a living example of that approach. And we come to this very important industry of ordinary and low-skilled citizens, the scrap iron industry. The Act, which is now known as Act 24 of 2022, was assented to, Dr. Moonilal, on Tuesday, December the 20th, 2022. But under Section 1, subsection 1A, there is a provision that talks about proclamation of the legislation to fully have it operationalized. Our intelligence thus far has revealed that there has been no proclamation. Maybe it took place overnight. But it has been assented to. What is very important in this instance is that under the old act known as the Oil, Metal and Marine Stores Act of 1904, Chapter 8407, those persons who had licenses under this old act is expected to continue functioning until, as the Attorney General said, August of 2023, when regulations are supposed to get into full train, and therefore the Act would become properly operationalized and thereby implemented. However, we have, according to the president of the Scrap Iron Dealers Association, Trinidad and Tobago Scrap Iron Dealers Association, some 25,000 ordinary people in this industry. The bulk of them are collectors of scrap material throughout our land. They do not have licenses to collect scrap. So what the Rowley government has done with this piece of legislation is to destroy almost the entire industry and those 25,000 workers, scrap collectors in Trinidad and Tobago. They do not have rather any licenses. So it therefore means that the government has scrapped the scrap iron industry by this piece of legislation and effectively destroyed. Dr. Keith Rowley, the Prime Minister, seems to have a dislike. Is it a hatred? He does not like poor people. You have a problem in the industry. Nobody argues against it. There has been theft of cable, there have been theft of copper, and all kinds of activities. But that is a law enforcement function. But to regulate the industry, there's no need to close it down. And when you look at the provisions of the legislation, that is what effectively has taken place. They have shut down the scrap iron industry, and they have placed more than 20,000 workers on the breadline and their families. That is unconscionable. That is indefensible. And they have not stopped there. Under the old act, if you commit an offense, the fine was $15,000. Today, under the new legislation, Act 24 of 2022, the fine is $500,000 and also 3 years in prison. If you are found operating illegally, as an example, if you are found not having a sign on your vehicle that is collecting scrap, that is properly displayed, you can be fined $250,000 on summary conviction and 1 year in prison. And if you are indicted and convicted, it goes up to $500,000 or 3 years in prison. Now, why would a government, in a period of crime, a tsunami of crime, as my colleague has outlined, where we have now crossed the 600 mark? We thought we had gone past the 600 mark, but we are near there, or we are about to cross it today or tomorrow. Why would a government seek at this time to really destroy an industry and place 25,000 workers and their family in jeopardy? Why would a government want to do this? And this is what is happening. The government has destroyed the industry, and by destroying this industry, what is left for these 25,000 workers to do? We are going to have an explosion of crime and violence in 2023. Where are these workers going to find jobs? How are they going to make two ends meet? This is the reality, that those 25,000 workers who are now going to be placed on the scrap heap, the dump heap of history through unemployment, how are they going to earn a living? How are they going to take care of their families? How are they going to send their children to school? The government just does not care. And therefore, we call on the workers to defend their jobs. We call on those workers whose jobs have now been threatened and is likely to be taken away from them to stand up for their rights, to defend their jobs. And we give them the assurance this morning that a united National Congress government will not approach the scrap iron industry in such a callous and brutal manner that will result, as this piece of legislation is leading to, tens of thousands of citizens being placed on the scrap heap of history through unemployment and therefore their inability to earn a livelihood. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, we come to a very important subject matter that is causing a lot of challenges insofar as good governance is concerned, transparency, accountability, integrity, and value for money. For the last 7 years, the Rowley-led administration gutted, literally destroyed the procurement legislation. The Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, which was enacted by the Honorable Prime Minister then and her government, Kamla Prasad Bisasa, and the People's Partnership, came into effect in 2015 by proclaiming certain sections of the Act. The PNM came into office in 2015 and they brought amendment after amendment after amendment to cut and to destroy the Act. And in 2020, they brought a piece of legislation to amend the public procurement law, and that piece of legislation exempted from the procurement regulator his independent oversight all financial dealings. So all financial transactions were removed. All legal services were removed. All auditing and accounting services were removed. All medical services were removed. All government-to-government transactions were removed. Private-public partnership were removed. This is what the PNM did in 2020 as they gutted the public procurement legislation. They came back in 2022, January and February, and they brought regulations which the Parliament supported. It was watered down, but they supported it. Lo and behold, the new Attorney General arrives on the scene on the 16th of March 2022, and within 1 month he writes a letter to the judiciary on the 12th of April inviting the judiciary to offer its comments on the challenges faced by it in the implementation and operationalization of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. This is after this act was duly and properly and constitutionally approved by one of the organs of state, the legislature, the parliament. Anyone who had any comments to make on that act, number 1 of 2015, could have made it between 2010 and 2015, including the judiciary. Why did the judiciary not submit their comments during the period 2010 and 2015? However, it is interesting, I should say, quite interestingly, there was a 29-page epistle. I don't know if my colleague has it, but the media can have a copy of the judiciary submission as it relates to their objections. 7 years later, when the act has already been passed by the people, there's something called the separation of powers, where you do not get into my business and I do not get into your business. The people's representatives in the parliament pass public procurement legislation to avoid corruption, to ensure accountability, transparency, value for money, integrity in public affairs as it relates to the purchase or the acquisition of goods and services and other works. Yet still, 7 years later, we are being told that there are still concerns surrounding this piece of legislation. You know what is ironic, Dr. Moonilal? The judiciary provided 10 judges. Those judges were approved by the Chief Justice to train the workers and the leadership of the procurement regulation or the Office of Procurement Regulation in 2018, 2019. Not only that, 3 judges from the CCJ also provided input into training the Office of Procurement Regulation. And we come in the month of April with the Attorney General writing to the Chief Justice, inviting him to comment on the implementation of the procurement legislation. Why did the AG sought to write to the judiciary inviting it to submit its comment on this matter when this matter was already settled? The law was passed. The time for comments passed. The law must be implemented. We do not know what is happening but we are concerned. We see some of these submissions as baseless that have been submitted. Some of them are erroneous and scathing in their assault on this very important office called the Office of Procurement Regulation. And we call on the judiciary to withdraw and to allow the law to take its course. There will be kinks, there will be challenges, there will be difficulties in the implementation of the legislation. But you know what? We will make amendments as we go along. But it is indefensible, it is inexcusable, it is unwarranted for any attempt to be made to attempt to stymie, stifle, and to in any way slow down the implementation of this important piece of legislation. Now, procurement is very important. We are told by the procurement regulator that Trinidad and Tobago spends $26 billion annually through the public sector and the public service, acquiring goods, services, and other works. And the OECD said in a paper that between 10 and 30% of monies that are spent in the European Union find their way getting out of the system through leakage. And 120 billion euros leaked through corruption in the European Union through that paper that they produced. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is estimated that some $5.5 billion is lost every year. $5.5 billion, and we are 7 years later. That is almost $35 billion that we have lost, that could have been used to build schools, to buy pharmaceutical products, to buy laptops for our children, to create more employment opportunities, to reduce the cost of living, to subsidize fuel. But you know what? There is an attempt by the executive, led by Dr. Rowley, not to implement this piece of legislation. And what the government has done under his watch in the last 7 years is to legalize thieving. They have legalized thieving of the public money by not implementing and operationalizing this very important piece of legislation. And they have gone to the judiciary, wittingly or unwittingly, to find support to further delay the implementation and operationalization of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. We reject, we object, we oppose, we condemn. We are saying that we must go back to the original act. A UNC government will go back to Act number 1 of 2015 and have it fully implemented and operationalized. And I say this in the context of the significance of procurement. Do you know, Dr. Moonilal, that we import something like 2.4 billion liters of refined fuel products 2021, 2020, 2022, and we only consume 1.1 billion liters. The next 1.3 billion is re-exported. And when we ask a question in the parliament and we got the answer, we are told that we are exporting 1.4 billion liters, but we don't know exactly. They give us 16 countries, but we don't know how much we're exporting to those 16 countries, what price we are paying for, they are paying for it, how much we are getting in return. So this is a scandal of enormous proportions that we are faced with. The government is exporting our fuel, and would you believe that between December of 2019 to January of 2022, Trinidad and Tobago spent $25 billion in the importation of refined fuel products, whether it's super gasoline, premium gasoline, whether it is diesel, whether it is kerosene, whether it is jet fuel. $25 billion. TT, you know what is the equivalent of US, Dr. Moonilal? 8 billion US dollars. 8 billion US dollars we are expending almost. Now this is 8 billion a year in TT, but the total amount is $3.5 billion. So, ladies and gentlemen of the media, I raise these matters, and I want to end my submission to you today by referring to the challenges faced by the working people. High cost of living. Between 2015 to 2021, food inflation has increased by over 40%. Unemployment has increased, and we have a number and a figure close to 150,000 citizens. More persons in this country are working for less than $3,000 a month as a result of the inequality in the distribution of income and wealth in our nation. Trinidad and Tobago's economy contracted by 20% during the period 2015 to 2021. So the citizens of our country are under enormous stress, and we need to take action, and the UNC is doing what it has to do in educating, in raising the citizens' consciousness, so that we can move towards early elections and put in place a government that can take care of the people, that can implement policies in the interest of the majority, and that can really, through those processes, improve the quality of life and standard of living of the citizens of our republic. I will pause at this time and hand over the proceedings to the Honorable Dr. Roodal Moonilal at this time.
Thank you very much, Senator Mark. Thank you for the comprehensive assessment of where we are as a nation as it relates to procurement in particular, and that sorry tale of the undermining of the procurement legislation passed by the People's Partnership Administration. That will also be a focus with an example in my presentation in a moment or two. But I want to begin my statement by raising a matter that is before us now in the national community, and that has to do with the convening of an electoral college pursuant to the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that provides for the election of a president of the Republic. The president is, of course, the highest office holder in this land and head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And we are going into this phase now where, as before, we will seek to elect the parliament into an electoral college, will elect a president. January 20th, we believe, has been the date set for such an election. And I raise just two matters related to that. First, it has been in the public space and on social media and so on, some discussion as to whether or not indeed the incumbent Prime Minister Keith Rowley himself may be considering himself for the elevation to that position. And I wanted to say from the start that the Opposition United National Congress received that type of warning with distress and with despair, because Dr. Rowley, in the event that he has his paws on that chair, ought to rethink that. Dr. Keith Rowley is clearly one of the least competent public office holders to have ever occupied the office of Prime Minister. There have been serious concerns about his work ethic. I think MP Barry Padarat put it in a very good language when he referred to him as lazy, with an adjective before, I believe. I thought MP Padarat was spot on. He has been the least competent. His policies have been flawed. As Senator Mark indicated, he has presided over the pauperization of this country, the complete decimation and lick-up of several sectors, including the scrap iron, of course, Senator Mark. And he has presided over this crime wave that MP Rambally spoke about earlier. And Dr. Rowley ought not to be considering himself. It will undermine the office of president for an incumbent prime minister to move from the seat of prime minister to president. Undermines the office of the president, undermines the highest office in the land, and it will create severe convulsions for proper functioning government in Trinidad and Tobago if this, by definition, incompetent soul is allowed to ascend to the office of president. So we want to put Dr. Rowley on alert that in the event that he takes God out of his mind, in the event that God is in his mind, and he ascend to that position and seek to ascend, the opposition will defy that and will stand up in defense of the right of citizens to have proper and fit office holders in the highest office in the land. Linked to that is another issue. We have also been reading that it may be that the government is considering an incumbent office holder in the person of the President of the Senate. And while I don't cast aspersions on the office of the President of the Senate and so on, again, it would be wrong for us to be looking at politicians, raw, naked, at times obscene politicians in the political sphere. The place for a politician is clearly in the Parliament. It is not in the President House. It is not in the judiciary. The place for politician is in the Parliament. And we ought not to be looking for incumbent politicians who themselves have been involved in the cut and thrust of politics. I believe they have filed several motions of no confidence in the person who is the President of the Senate, I believe, Senator Mark. And the opposition and the national community have raised several concerns about the integrity of that office holder, about the conduct of the nation's business, and so on. And it will be a wound to the body politic to take office holders, whether they be the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, and place in that exalted office as President. We believe that that is something that the nation should resist. We do have a precedent, yes, persons will say we have a precedent of a sitting politician, but even that precedent, when we look back at that, the nation was through a very difficult period of disharmony, dysfunctional at some time as well, and that led to severe problems, so that we ought not to be looking at that as any proper precedent in these circumstances. And the office holders themselves in Parliament, President of the Senate, Speaker, have also been on the receiving end of motions of no confidence by members of the opposition, and the national community have also spoken on that. So we warn the country that we will not accept, we will not embrace these raw, naked, indecent politicians assuming any office of the president. And certainly, as far as Dr. Rowley is concerned, one never knows. In fact, I've been told that he has been very silent on current affairs, crime, all these matters at this time. Whether that is to, present himself in some other department, I put it down to him just having a accelerated period of
Rest.
Revelry, an accelerated period of revelry during the season. And he may be very busy celebrating and not speaking out on current affairs. I pray that he's not preying on the office. We hope that he is not himself taking a step backward to leap into that office of the president, because it's something that we reject strenuously. Strenuously. Dr. Rowley is the prime minister. He has failed doing that. If he has come to the point where he wants to move on, dissolve the parliament and call the election and allow this country to vote for a government of their choice.
Exactly.
But do not use the prime minister office as a stepping stone to get into an office of president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. It is wrong. It goes against the grain of democracy, against the separation of powers. It will create severe problems. In fact, an incoming UNC administration should not be encumbered. An incoming UNC administration, as we believe we will be in office very soon, should not be encumbered by a PNM president in office, an overt, naked, raw, indecent PNM operative at the president house. So we must strive to have persons who are independent, who are neutral, who have some professional background that allow a certain level of judgment and statesmanship to assume this position. So I will leave that there and get to my second issue, which is a very troubling issue. In a way, it is linked to both the presentations of MP Rambally and the presentation of Senator Mark, because it is linked to crime and it is linked to procurement. And that has to do with the CCTV cameras. Now, in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, Minister Stuart Young once accused me of having an obsession with the CCTV cameras. I told him I had 16 at home, so I'm not obsessed with that. But what I was obsessed with is good governance. I am obsessed with fighting corruption, injustice, fraud, deception. And that is what led me to the CCTV camera matter. Members of the press, Trinidad and Tobago is today facing a very, very difficult time. Very, very difficult time. The critical infrastructure of the CCTV cameras has been on the front burner in the parliament for several times. I just want to remind persons that CCTV camera initiative indeed started under the Patrick Manning administration as a requirement for the 2008 hosting of the Summit of the Americas. At that time, they were looking only at about 600, 700 cameras, and generally in the Port of Spain, the city of Port of Spain, and the Piarco International Airport, Port of Spain corridor, so to speak. When the summit came to an end, an incoming partnership administration took a policy position that we will embark on what is called smart cities. And part of smart cities involved the embarking on a comprehensive, widespread program of CCTV camera infrastructure to deal with crime, to deal with public order, to deal with monitoring traffic and all these type of things. So that it has its root in the Manning administration. We expanded that program from 700 cameras more or less to 1,400 and then 1,500. We became the first government to put CCTV cameras in Tobago, where we put, I think, 82 cameras because we had 1 or 2 incidents of crime there as well, and we were dealing with that. Since 2016, the PNM administration has been on a warpath with a state entity called TSTT, and they have now run up a bill of $1 billion more or less, which the central government owes TSTT, because TSTT had been the entity in partnership with a foreign company to have installed the hardware, the software, the backbone, the technological support, the monitoring and maintenance, the equipment. TSTT was doing that. Stuart Young in particular and Keith Rowley went on the warpath to say that when we were in office, the cameras were expensive and so on. And what they did is, in a rather amateurish way, they looked at a camera and said the camera is $12,000 per camera. Now, when we buy a camera for our home, assuming it is $2,000 or $3,000 a camera and so on, that affects us. We say, well, how come a camera could be $12,000 and when you buy something is $2,000, $3,000? And Stuart Young and Rowley carried a narrative that we were paying too much. Incidentally, we were paying TSTT, a state enterprise we were paying, not a private company. And in doing that, in the most amateurish way, unprofessional and so on, they forget that when the camera is installed, it is not the camera. It is the technological backbone. It is the infrastructure. It is the fiber. It is the maintenance. It is the sophisticated command centers that we need operationalized. It is feeding materials to the security agencies. It is storing materials. It is a comprehensive technological initiative. And when you take the cost of everything from beginning to end, it works out to $12,000 more or less a camera. But that is not for the camera. That is for a service. It is for maintenance. It is for equipment, etc., etc. So they were on that beat. By 2018, something happened in the country, of course, in 2018, which alerted me as a member of parliament and members of the opposition. By September 2018, we heard of an open competitive tendering process at the Ministry of National Security to invite private providers to compete and bid for the provision of CCTV cameras, both software and hardware. That process started, and on a particular day in September, I believe it was September 7, 2018, 2 p.m. tenders supposed to close. At 2 p.m. tenders closing for that process. 4 tenders, 4 bidders entered, including TSTT and 2 or 3 others, including Digicel, I believe. Yeah. And what happened was a remarkable incident. And I have in my hand the email, which my colleague here will try to put up for us. In an email from one Christy Edwards, Ministry of National Security email address, 7th September, I was right. Amended dates and time for re-engineering and expansion of CCTV camera. She, I assume is a she said, "Dear all, on the recommendation of the Director Strategic Services Agency, the Chairman Special Tenders Committee has agreed to extend the date for the close of tender from September 7th to September 21st, 2018. Could you imagine when the tender closed, they announced that we extended it? Because somebody didn't put in their bid. Somebody didn't put in it. Christy Edwards, procurement officer. And we must keep that name in mind because somebody will be interested in talking to her soon. This was described as craziness by the bidders because they submitted their bid. They submitted what is called cost and the technical part of the bid. It was opened. People saw what you were bidding, what you were proposing, and then they say, okay, you have 14 days again. When I raised this matter in Parliament, Stuart Young said I'm obsessed with CCTV camera. He was the Minister of National Security then, I believe. I think he was there. The tenders were from, incidentally, submitted by TSTT Digicel, Hawaii, I believe, Hawaii. Not Larry Hawaii, but
I think it's called Huawei.
Huawei, okay, good. Wade Mark knows much more about this business. He said Huawei. Huawei and Cable and Wireless, I believe, as well. So they submitted their bids and so on properly in time to be told at the end when the bidding time finished that we extended it by 14 days. We raised the matter in Parliament, of course. We raised the matter. And we were told that the minister believed that there were certain irregularities, or the ministry. What irregularities? What irregularities? And they then extended it to January 2019. Months passed, we raised again in the Parliament. What has happened? We were told that they extended it. The bidders apparently knew nothing of this extension when it was opening, when it was closing. And suddenly in the Parliament they announced that a company by the name of Johnson Controls Incorporated had been awarded a contract to provide hardware, not software, hardware. And they were awarded through a process. What process? We don't know. We simply don't know. Members of the press, we don't know. This craziness, this madness was allowed. And by Johnson Controls won a bid. We don't know who else submitted bid, if anybody at all. They won bid for cameras, but not backbone technology, infrastructure, maintenance, nothing else. Incidentally, the camera system that we have now, although 50% not working, that system is owned by TSTT. So if any one of us provide cameras, we can hook up a camera on the wall on a lamppost. But how are you running that camera to the infrastructure to create a network for a command center, to show police, to show intelligence? You can't without TSTT. You know what Johnson Control say? They say, okay, let me borrow TSTT infrastructure. What do you think it is? A jacket? It's a computer, a laptop you can borrow from somebody. It is a sophisticated piece of technology. It is operations. It is everything. And another thing that is we must note here is that CCTV camera footage capturing issues of crime, national security, intelligence ought not to be in the hands of a private foreign provider. Yes. So a private foreign provider have access to national security coverage for CCTV camera footage that may involve the highest level of intelligence. They will now have to store in their headquarters in some part of the world coverage in Trinidad and Tobago that has serious consequences for national security.
Which are raised in Parliament.
Which we all raised those matters in Parliament. So the death of TSTT and so on. But the government, PNM, has always been fighting TSTT on this, and one wonders why. Today the opposition has received some news which I am now about to share with you. When we raised these matters in the Parliament, they said, of course, we were making, a big thing out of nothing, and it was a little irregularity and so on. As MP Rambally said, we're not sure 100% that we will leave matters in the hands of the local TTPS because they are investigating Vincent Nelson. I don't know where that has reached. We don't know. They're investigating that matter, which is, as Dinesh Rambally told us earlier, one of the biggest scandals in the criminal justice system ever is a private agreement between a witness and the state to prosecute a political opponent. So we don't know about the police doing that. But members of the press, I can now inform you that we do have something in writing, which we'll find now and share with you, where it has been reported, and I'll ask my colleague to bring it up on our system, a letter, and I have it in my hand, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, a note dated Tuesday, December 27th, it is on your screen. It is a complaint made to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, this is not a complaint made to the police in Port of Spain. This is to the U.S. federal government. And the person says, my name is Alessandro Arez, I believe. I represent and have worked with an Israeli-based company, Mer Group, a company that specializes in security systems and solutions. We have been working in Trinidad and Tobago since 2008, installing the CCTV Center and Command and Control for Summit of the Americas when President Barack Obama and other dignitaries attended this meeting. In 2018, there was a fraudulent tender. I repeat. In 2018, there was a fraudulent tender that was managed to be given to a specific vendor, and it was adjudicated after the closing and submission date was reached. 4 companies, including our group, presented our technical and commercial proposals, which were opened, and the tendering process ended, but continued, so to speak. The tender process was opened again for a future date, so to speak. And the information we had submitted was already known to our competitors, and it was awarded to Johnson Controls Incorporated. And we really believe that this tender smells rotten. Now, this is Spanish to English, I believe we're dealing with. But rotten, we all understand what that means. We understand what. So, and it goes on, is there a claim number we are referred to? So that this has been referred to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, based in Washington, but operates out of New York as well, the state of New York. They said, thank you for contacting the U.S. Security and Exchange Commission. We gave a response that we have received this. It is receiving our attention, and etc., etc. So what has happened here is that this matter has been reported to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. But how does it link to the U.S.? Because Johnson Controls, we believe, operates in the United States of America under American law. And America has the Foreign Corrupt Act, as Dinesh Rambally would tell us. And it is against American law for a company operating in the United States to be involved in corrupt practices in another country. And therefore they have jurisdiction now. And the US authorities are now hot in pursuit of Trinidad and Tobago operatives in the PNM government who presided over this tendering process and gave a contract without process to Johnson Controls according to the data information we have before us. Because we have many emails which I don't want to spend time reading. I read the one with the tendering and so on. We have several emails here concerning that. So what has happened, members of the press, is the United States Securities Exchange Commission will now investigate the tendering process used in 2018 September. When they abort that process, whether it was fraudulently given to another competitor company under dubious circumstances, it is now in the hands of the United States agencies. So that, in a strange way, I can tell you, this becomes the first country in the world where the surveillance cameras are under surveillance by US authorities. The cameras are under surveillance. And it speaks volumes that we have now reached the stage. We have now reached the stage where under Stuart Young, Hines, and Rowley, the American authorities are investigating the award of contract in Port of Spain under the supervision of the PNM, Minister Stuart Young, who is, I think, acting as everything these days. They are now handling that. So we have been in touch with this issue. We wanted to raise the issue to share the information that came to us in terms of this matter in New York, in Washington and New York. We believe from day one that this was some type of bubble, some dubious award of a contract. And having said that, to link back to Mr. Rambally, is that today we have 1,600, more or less 1,600 cameras, and about 600 or more are not functioning. So whatever they have done, it has not led to the provision of a fully operational system of CCTV coverage. Many of us have had, examples in our own life where something happens on the road, a criminal conduct, where there's an accident, a hit and run or something. And when you go to the police almost with a certain amount of shame, they sheepishly tell you that the cameras in the neighborhood, they are not working. And they are apologetic in a sense because they are not responsible for that. So we will continue to monitor the investigation of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, and we will be available to help in any way we can with that matter. I will just end with one matter again. I have two matters, but I'll touch one. Is that in the matter of national security, I also wanted to indicate that all is not well in terms of the supply of fire, what we call fire trucks, but appliances and so on. And we'll talk about that in the new year. We will speak to that matter in the new year in more detail, because we are in another calamity, Dinesh, where at several fire stations, some built by the UNC, Pinal, Mayaro, and so on, and in the East-West Corridor in Chagaramas that cover the military base there and cover the constituencies in Diego Martin, that they are short of appliances, of equipment, and critical equipment. In the East-West Corridor, it is a crisis that is now emerging. Everything in national security has collapsed around this incompetent Fitzgerald Hines. Even in police, we are told that on Friday, last Friday I believe, the police received brand new vehicles. They received a certain amount of vehicles and then indicated, thank you for these vehicles. We now have 150 old vehicles to send to the graveyard in Komoto. So imagine you receive about 70 vehicles and then you have to send 50. So effectively you are back to square one or worse. So that the police today complain of patrols, they complain of vehicles. 150 police vehicles are on the way to the graveyard in Komoto for what is called auction, which will take forever to do. So that will stockpile down there as old scrap in a dying scrap industry sector. And the final matter I'll raise in closing, which I'll speak in the new year much more about, concerns another UDCOT debacle. We have been following UDCOT for the last year. Crisis as it relates to the central block construction. Crisis as it relates to the Red House and the roof leaking. They say it's the condenser and the air conditioner in the ceiling. Red House of Representative, lower house, locked down. So what explains the leak in the office of the opposition leader conference room? What explains the leak in other places? What explains the leak and the mold in ceiling in the Senate chamber? What explains that? So we have this crisis now of the UDCOT projects. We are back to the bad old days before 2010, where every UDCOT project, starting with the Brian Lara Stadium and so on, is now riddled in some type of bubble, corruption, mismanagement, inexplicable variation. We are now told that the magistrate court project in San Fernando, Dinesh is aware of that site, Irving Street around there. Yes. That has now, they have reached a stage where they spend out all the money budgeted, they put only infrastructure in the ground, not the superstructure, so to speak. They erect crane, these machines for the cranes and so on, 10 months a day, never used, they have to pay the people, and they are now, when they started construction there, they're so hurried to start, it almost led to the collapse of Irving Street into the yard, into the building site. They had to do a retaining wall there that cost enormous amount of money to protect the road, which apparently they didn't know they had to do before. And they have spent out all the money. The project is now at a standstill. They are paying, would you believe they are paying rental for a building in the area as well? Because they are using that building for some purpose of storage, or they are using it. And they have to pay now owners in the area who, if they detect damage to their building and property and so on, they have to pay. So that project of the magistrate court building in San Fernando is another scandal waiting for us to reveal, to uncover in the coming days, in the coming weeks, in the coming months in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And while all of this is happening, Minister Hines continues galloping on that animal that he was among in a recent picture. He continues as if nothing is happening. The murder rate, this is another amazing thing. I mean, I believe the police is now counting backward, because every time you hear the official figure, it sounds like one less, yes, and not one more. Yes. While we are told by those who monitor these things, we are quite way over 600. The police is saying 596 or so. And it might be 595 tomorrow, because they are counting backwards, because they are holding on to the hours, hoping that Saturday night will come and they can keep it to 599. Yes. Somehow they want to deny the century in that sense. But that is the ridiculous nature that we have reached in the country. Because quite frankly, it matters not whether it's 596 or 606. It matters that it is the highest murder rate in the history of Trinidad and Tobago under this incompetent Fitzgerald Hines, Rowley, Stuart Young, and others who are managing and mismanaging the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. They focus on firearm. Remember, to attack Gary Griffith, they focus on legal firearm. I have in my hand, which again, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time. We forced a response from the TTPS over how many, over how many legal firearms have been used in the commission of criminal offenses, because they were focusing on that because they wanted to get Gary Griffith to go after him. And look at this, the response. There was a total of 108 legal firearms misplaced, stolen, neglected, or otherwise reported having engaged the attention of the police. Correct. Now 108 over a period 2017 to 2021. Look, I have it here. Official document from Ministry of National Security. So they're telling us that, we have to investigate the issuance of legal firearms involved in criminal activity and so on. Look, the police tell us 108 legal firearms, and here what it was: misplaced, stolen, neglected, or otherwise reported to police. That is when people were either they lost their firearm, they misplaced it, it was stolen in a robbery, for example. This is what we were told. Of the 108, 7 individuals have been arrested or charged in connection with the loss of firearms through negligence, not the commission of a criminal offense. Right. And they made it out as if, these legal firearms were going in the hands of people committing crimes and so on. 18 were retrieved, 2 were reportedly lost, 10 were stolen through break-ins, larceny. 6 were lost in robbery. You understand what has happened here? I tell you this to tell you that they were making this big conspiracy theory, yes, that under Mr. Griffith they gave out firearms, and somehow those firearms created a problem for crime and criminal activity. Well, the police themselves tell us here is 108 over 20. That's how much it is, 2017 to 2021. All that time, in that year, in that 108 legal firearms stolen, misplaced, people forget it somewhere, that type of thing, neglected it and so on. So these are the issues that bother us at this time. A few issues I've raised with you this morning, and I think I will leave it there, and we can take some questions from members of the press through our various systems.
We have some questions from the music.
Good morning, Mr. Fraser from the UC. To Dr. Moonilal, I know you were speaking against politicians considering presidency. I want to know if this is something that is across the board, meaning if a member of your own party were to tell you, I'm interested in presidency, you'd also warn them against,
What our position on this matter is very clear, is that Dr. Rowley in particular, the President of the Senate in particular, the Speaker of the House in particular, have defined themselves in their political roles, and it will be improper for those persons to seek to ascend to the office of president, for sitting politicians in that sense, and not just politicians, political leaders in that sense in their different chamber and so on, to ascend. And it's obnoxious for persons who themselves have been involved in politics. Now, absolutely nothing is wrong if persons have been involved in politics. They demit office, they take a backseat, so to speak. They move themselves away from politics for a period of time. They still have experience, judgment, well trained, and so on. And they move away from politics, and maybe they are nominated, and so on. We can't predict the future. But I do not believe people should move from the chair of Prime Minister to President, or from the chair of President of the Senate to President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, given their quite recent and concurrent participation in the guile of politics. That is the position.
Right. And to Mr. Rambally, I know you were mentioning that, while prayer is useful, it's just not, just prayer is not going to solve the crime problems. But do you see when those things happen, those daily prayer and do you see it as useful?
It is always useful to engage in prayer sessions. In fact, I could say that members here will bear me out. As members of the opposition, we frequently hold prayers as well within our constituencies. As a party, before party caucus, we will have prayer sessions. We will have members drawn from the caucus itself who will engage in prayers to, in fact, get enlightenment in terms of how we have to be guided in what direction we want to go. And, acceding to the supreme divinity is not the issue here. What is the issue that we are making in terms of this Rowley-led PNM government is that you have now thrown up your arms in the air and you're just waving it all over and saying, well, all we are doing at this point in time is engaging in prayer. Prayer has to be something that, having acceded to the divinity for some guidance, knowledge, wisdom, divine intervention, that you yourself will now get down to work and say, okay, we are going to enforce some kind of or implement some policy position. We are going to look at the statistics that we have. We're going to see what is working, what is not working. But on that note, I want to tell you that prayer has not helped Dr. Rowley and Minister Hines, because they hold strong to a position which is fundamentally ideologically wrong. And this is what I was saying, wrong as a matter of law, wrong as a matter of fact, wrong as a matter of common sense, that it is their duty to ensure the safety and security of the citizens of this country. So prayer has not helped them, because that fundamental point seems to be elusive to them.
Okay, and my last question would be to anybody at the table, actually. This morning, the finance minister would have posted something on Twitter saying that in total for the year, 2.35 billion has been deposited into the agency. And he said, someone had asked, where did the funds come from? And he said, higher than estimated revenues from petroleum. Anyone want to give feedback on that?
Well, in accordance with the law, the Heritage and Stabilization Act makes it very clear that there's a formula whenever you budget for oil, crude oil in particular, because we have not budgeted for natural gas. Once it comes above the level that you have budgeted for, then there's a formula in the legislation and there's a time frame in which you have to adhere to make, for instance, that sum of money in excess that you have budgeted for, place that said sum into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So legally, he's bound by law to place into the HSF that excess sum of money that he would have gained as a result of higher oil prices. You would have observed, however, in the 2022-2023 budget, he has budgeted up the price of a barrel of oil, crude oil, at $92.50. Now, right now as we speak, oil is almost $5 below $92.50. And natural gas, which he budgeted at $6 US per 1,000 cubic feet, it is down to about $5.40, just under $6. So what it means is that in the case of crude oil, all the signals are telling us that crude oil will not go beyond $92.50 for this fiscal year 2022-2023. So what Minister Imbert has done is to tell Trinidad and Tobago there will be no monies going into the HSF for the fiscal year 2022 to 2023.
Could I just add here that while Mr. Imbert is seeking to boast about following the law, what he's doing is really following the law. He's not doing anything special. This is not kindness. This is not a favor. He's following the law, the requirements of the law. But he didn't tell us that in the fiscal 2021, he withdrew $900 million or about $6 billion from the HSF, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. In 2021 fiscal, withdrew $900 million. He pulled out. Now he's boasting that he's depositing in fiscal 2022 because oil prices are higher than budgeted, and that is the law. If he doesn't do that, he is breaking the law. And while our judgment spoke about, his improper conduct in the appointment or the disappointment of a public officer, he will break the law if he doesn't do that. So there's no need, Mr. Imbert, to go and put a poster on your website and thing and say you're putting money in the HSF. There's a law. You have to. If you don't do that, you're breaking the law. But why don't you tell the people when you boast about how much you put in now? Why don't you say how much you take out last year?
Exactly.
And that is the issue that I think we need to focus on as well.
And just to add to Dr. Moonilal, you would have seen, member of the press, that in the United States, a gallon of gas is around $3.10 as we speak. At one time, a gallon was close to $5.15. It has come down. So the people of the United States are benefiting from lower gas prices. In South Africa, there was a recent release where they are also going to be benefiting from lower fuel prices at the pump compared to what they were paying a year ago. Trinidad and Tobago, where the price is high in terms of crude oil prices going down, reflected in lower refined fuel products, we are subsidizing the government of Trinidad and Tobago, whether it is premium gasoline, whether it is super unleaded gasoline, or even diesel gasoline. So we are not the beneficiaries of any reduction in crude oil prices that is reflected in the processed end product, which is the refined fuel products. How are we benefiting? Why does Mr. Imbert not address this matter? Why is the government not reducing the price at the pump as a result of lower crude oil prices in the global community, where the United States citizens are benefiting and citizens from South Africa are also benefiting? Why are we not benefiting? So I just add to what Dr. Moonilal has said. So if he wants to, he always on his Twitter account, let him deal with why we are not benefiting from lower gas prices in Trinidad and Tobago.
Some more questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions online. MP Rambally, how has the lack of having a substantive commissioner of police affecting the TPS's ability to fight crime?
Well, I think we can just simply go back to basics. Having no one to lead, to substantively lead the police service, that in itself renders the service rudderless, directionless. So it goes without saying that not having a substantive person in that position of commissioner of police, and a substantive commissioner of police. You see, when you hold a position and you know that that position belongs to you, you are enamored with the position itself and the duties and the functions, even the benefits that go with it. You know that that is your office and you therefore perform with a certain vigor, and you will now lead by example. You are going to enforce certain strategies. Officers are going to respect you as well. Those who fall under the lower trappings, they are going to respect that you hold that position. They're going to follow your lead. So if you say, look, we are going to weed out the rogue officers and we are going to implement this strategy because this is what we want to deal with, officers who follow that lead will understand, listen, the boss is in charge, the boss has spoken, and this is something that we have to abide by. So I think, the fact that you don't have that person there, it renders the police service rudderless, directionless, leaderless, and that in itself sends a certain kind of a psyche throughout the police service whereby they lack morale, they don't have the leadership that they need. It also sends a signal to the criminal elements that, listen, that police service, they don't know whether they're coming or they are going, and therefore if we have to strike, now is the time to strike. And that is what we have been seeing in terms of the numbers of serious murders and crimes in the country.
Recently, at a murder scene in Kelly Village, spent shells reportedly from the Trans-Tobago Regiment were found. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, Dr. Moonilal made reference.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Dr. Moonilal made reference to some statistics coming from the police service in respect of they talking about legal firearms and the spin that they're attempting to put on it. But we have heard nothing really from the police service in terms of this Trinidad and Tobago Regiment spent shell. And in fact, our colleague, Member of Parliament for Caroni East, Dr. Seacharan, he himself has questioned and has called for some investigation into this matter where someone was killed in his constituency, and we saw this issue of the spent shell being that belonging to the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment. I know Senator Mark.
If I may just add to what my colleague has said, it is very troubling and concerning that the taxpayers of this country, whose monies are spent on the importation of arms and ammunition to provide to our defense force, in this instance the regiment, can end up through the release of same and manifested in the murder of citizens of our republic. That is disturbing. It is dangerous. It is troubling. And the government, Minister Hines, as Dr. Moonilal pointed out, has spent time along with his Prime Minister attacking the former Commissioner of Police and blaming him indirectly for the escalation of crime through the issuance of legal weapons. We just got from Dr. Moonilal, there is no such correlation, there is no such connection. Minister Hines must spend time now concentrating on how ammunition that is supposed to be used in defense of the people by defense force personnel can find their way in the hands of killers and criminals, resulting in the murder of citizens of this republic. That is extremely worrying, and I think the Express in an editorial, recent editorial, called for a complete management audit and review of this defense force, of the defense force, and to determine what is wrong. are we recruiting criminals in the regiment of Trinidad and Tobago? Something is wrong in this context. You would have read over the last 2 years, and I've been paying attention to it, where personnel from the regiment have been found to be accused and charged. The Pennywise comes to mind for murder. So there are people in the army or the regiment that found their way into the ranks that are now being, there appears to be some collusion with the criminal element in our nation. That is concerning, and that is something that we must pay attention to in Trinidad and Tobago. The Defense Force and the police, they are there to protect and serve the citizens, and not to be selling or renting their guns or ammunition to killers and murderers in our nation.
Well, I just want to add quickly that in the report that we received from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, it speaks of firearms, not ammunition per se. But this is a very serious matter raised here, and maybe at the Joint Select Committee on National Security, we should raise this issue of ammunition in the hands of members of the protective service, police, defense force, regiment, everyone. And when they are found at the crime scene, at a murder scene and so on, and call for an investigation into that specifically, because that will also be what is called legal firearm and ammunition. So when they speak of legal firearm and ammunition, it is not what is given out to private citizens.
Exactly.
It is also what is in the possession of police officers, members of the regiment and defense force. That is legal ammunition.
Yes.
And maybe this is a matter that we will in the coming days be raising at the Joint Select Committee on National Security in the Parliament.
Very important.
Yeah.
Very
Now,
important.
one of the matters I wanted to mention, and Dr. Moonilal alluded to it earlier. Dr. Moonilal, Senator Mark, Senator Jayanti Lakshmi Diyal, MP Saddam Hussein, MP Rodney Charles, myself, we belong, I hope I didn't miss out anyone, but we belong to a committee within a shadow portfolio within our opposition, and set up, of course, by our political leader. And one of the matters that we have noted that the government has been silent on, and the acting top cop Commissioner Jacobs, former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith has indicated categorically that during his tenure, no legal firearms was found to be used in the commission of any crimes. And that is something that we have not heard the government counter to say otherwise. So you have a situation where, in as much as this government, the head of the National Security Council, the Prime Minister himself, Minister of National Insecurity Hines, they are going after, firearm policy and firearm users and the award of firearms to persons. What we have is we have a situation where they have not been able to show that during the tenure of the former Commissioner of Police, that is Gary Griffith, that there was the commission of crimes using legal firearms. And that is something he has put out there in the public since as early as January or February 2022, I recall. And we have not seen the government counter that with any kind of statistics. So it goes to show really where the priorities or the mispriorities are in terms of this government in dealing with crime.
I just wanted to clarify based on a question I received as well, to make it abundantly clear in this press conference, that when I raised the matter that before the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, I made reference to a group that reported the matter. So the matter was not reported per se by the opposition or by a political party or anything like that. This is not a matter involving a political party. It is a matter involving corruption and fraud allegations, and it was sent to the United States authority by one of the companies that felt that they were cheated and disadvantaged,
Yes.
and deceived, and the company that got the award got so by fraudulent means. So it was not a political action, so to speak.
Regarding that same contract, did the group that approached the U.S. authorities, have they also approached local authorities to investigate the matter?
I'm not in a position to say whether they have reported this in Trinidad and Tobago, But what they did say in some of the correspondence that I've seen is that one of the problems in this country is that because you are dealing with local companies as well, several of these companies may not want to report the government and report influential members of a government in allegations of corruption to local authorities because they may fear, as they are entitled to fear, and we have evidence that they should fear a malicious prosecution. They will be in fear of discriminatory treatment, retaliation by officials of the PNM government and so on. So that one company believed it was even better in the circumstances that as a foreign company they report to the United States agencies that may have jurisdiction in the matter because of the identity of the quote-unquote successful bidder.
Yes. Senator Mark, you mentioned scrap iron industry. The government shut down the scrap iron industry because of the real problem with cable theft and copper theft. Looking back at it now, do you perhaps feel that given the high crime rate, that some of these criminals may have migrated to other forms of crime?
Well, the issue here I raised earlier is that the government has been a monumental failure when it comes to policy formulation to take our nation to a higher level of not only economic activity, but prosperity for the vast majority of the citizenry of our society. So when the government brings legislation that has not been properly thought out, and that legislation upon deep or deeper reflection reveals that it will result in a closure of the industry and the displacement and dislocation of thousands of ordinary persons who make their living through that industry. Then obviously, if you shut down the industry by the harsh and oppressive measures that you have introduced in legislation, what do you expect those persons who are unemployed to do? Those very workers used to be outside the gates of Petrotrin looking for jobs when Petrotrin was alive. Rowley shut down Petrotrin, and those persons migrated to the scrap iron industry. Now you have shut down the scrap iron industry. What alternatives are left to those persons to earn a honest and decent livelihood? I'm saying most likely they are going to migrate into an area that would make our country unhappy. And that is why we are saying to this government that in 2023 we may witness an explosion in crime and violence as they displace 25,000 workers who were involved in that industry along with their families.
Dr. Moonilal, regarding the presidency, will the opposition be making their candidates public?
But of course, it's not for me to say. The opposition leader and her team would meet, would engage, and have discussions and so on, and discuss those matters in the coming days as to whether or not, as we all know, in the current system, which is in dire need of reform, the election of a president is done by the Electoral College, which is effectively the parliament, and it is based on a simple majority, so that the government generally would have its way. They will propose and that person would carry. The opposition in the coming days would make a further statement on these matters.
Regarding the rumor about Dr. Rowley assuming the presidency, if that situation arises, Dr. Do you think that there should be a general election, or can the government sustain itself?
Well, it's a curious event. Assuming something like that materializes, it means therefore that a new prime minister would have to be appointed by the former prime minister, a new
Exactly.
prime minister have to be appointed
Exactly.
by a former prime minister, and that would be a democratic disaster
Yeah.
because the country did not elect any other person in that sense.
Yes.
And once that happens, that disaster of a Keith Rowley going to the president house, effectively they must and they should, and we will demand that they dissolve parliament and call general elections.
Exactly.
But we are hoping that we will not reach there because, a modicum of good sense should prevail. And Dr. Rowley ought not, as I said before, to have his paws on that seat.
I don't think we don't have any more questions.
Okay, well, in closing, let me, on behalf of the Honorable Political Leader of our party, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisasa, and the entire UNC family, to extend best wishes to the people of our beloved republic as we enter a new year in the coming hours and the coming days. 2022 was a disaster for Trinidad and Tobago under the reign and rule of this kleptocratic administration. We anticipate there will be no difference, no changes come 2023 for the working class. It will be more oppression, more exploitation, more victimization, more criminality that citizens will be facing in 2023. What we call on all the people to pay attention to if we are to get over this hump, and as the Black Stalin said, we can make it if we try, and if we try harder. We need to unite. We need to organize. We need to mobilize. We need to continue our educational drive to build consciousness and awareness. Because the only solution to Trinidad and Tobago's problem is for the Prime Minister to do the decent and honorable thing. That is to dissolve the Parliament, hold fresh elections, and let the people decide. So, on behalf of the opposition, UNC, and our beloved leader, we wish all the people of Trinidad and Tobago a productive, a bright, a healthy, safe, and secure 2023.